Hi, everyone, and welcome to the State of State Schools podcast. I'm your host, John Stamper, Christian author, former homeschooler, and former public school teacher. Once a week, I'll give a quick recap of the most important headlines in education and pull back the curtain on what's really happening in our kids' schools. If you're a teacher, parent, or homeschool family, this podcast is for you. Thanks for listening, and let's get started. Hi, everybody. Welcome to episode number 24. We just have two big stories coming from the week of May 29th. Here are the headlines. The NEA is recruiting activists to help promote their big summer event, and a public school district is using COVID relief funds to host a drag show and other LGBTQ events. So, do you remember the American Rescue Plan, or ARP, that was passed by President Biden, also known as the COVID Relief Plan? This was during COVID when state and federal government shut down the country, they shut down schools, and then they raised taxes on all of us to help us, quote unquote, recover from the damage caused by the government. So the government basically committed extortion, took $122 billion of taxpayer money, then they gave it to public schools to help them safely stay open during COVID. Well, Manchester School District in New Hampshire is putting their COVID money to good use. How, might you ask? Well, they're hosting a drag show, of course. I mean, it is Pride Month after all. I guess the school year just wouldn't be complete without sexualizing young children, celebrating queer sex, homosexuality, and transgenderism. I'm kidding, of course. The district is spending at least $1,000 on their Youth Pride event, which will consist of drag performers, pride decorations and swag, and even some LGBTQ lawn decorations. The superintendent stated, quote, "Events such as this are consistent with the goals of our community-developed strategic plan." So there's a strategic plan. And they're in line with district policies. And then the school district's chief equity officer chimed in saying, quote, "Joyful spaces where LGBTQ plus youth feel loved, celebrated, and centered is the work of public education," end quote. That's the chief equity officer of this school district. It's the work of the public education system to create joyful spaces for LGBTQ youth, to celebrate LGBTQ youth, and to make them the center. That's the work of public education, according to her or him. So this is wrong on many levels. First of all, the government created a crisis during COVID, then raised taxes to help us, quote unquote, recover. Then the government dishes out that money to public schools who use the money to promote the current administration's political ideologies. Kind of full circle here. And anyone in the community who disagrees with the money being used to sexualize young children, they don't get a say in the matter. They're just told to stay home if they don't want to go. But they don't get a say in how their money is spent. Next, drag shows and LGBTQ pride events are completely inappropriate for public schools, and they should not be targeting young children. I mean, think of these teachers and staff in the school district who support this event. They're grown men, grown women, and I'm sure many are part of the LGBTQ community. They want to celebrate being gay, being bisexual. That means they like to have sex with men and women. Trans, they want to celebrate being queer with little kids. I mean, even if they were celebrating heterosexuality with little kids, it's still perverted. So my point is, parents, make sure you know what your school's policies are on this matter. Know what your school board supports and what your state government supports, and then consider homeschooling your children or sending them to a school that doesn't sexualize them, doesn't confuse them, and doesn't use them to validate perverted ideologies. Story number 2, the National Education Association, the NEA, which is not just the largest teachers union in the country, but the largest union period, they have started advertising for their big annual event called the, quote, "Freedom to Learn and Teach Truth Day of Action," end quote. Regarding this event on their website, the NEA states, quote, "Some politicians are trying to censor the lessons taught in our classrooms, ban books, and exclude certain kids based on what they look like or where they live. They're trying to divide and distract us from their failures to provide all of our kids everything they need to learn, grow, and thrive. But together, we can make our voices loud and clear to protect the freedom to learn and teach truth, end quote. That's the NEA statement on their website. So the very first statement that the NEA makes about their event is an attack on conservative politicians. So by doing so, they establish that the purpose of this event is to promote one brand of politics over another. And of course, the NEA believes that their brand of politics is the truth, and that's what every child in America should learn. So I discuss the NEA a bit in my book, and I point out that they once shared Saul Alinsky's Rules for Radicals as summer reading for any teachers who were interested in activism. So in case you're not familiar with those quote-unquote rules for radicals, here are just a few examples. First of all, quote, ridicule is man's most potent weapon, end quote. Next example, quote, if you push a negative hard and deep enough, it will break through into its counterside. This is based on the principle that every positive has its negative, end quote. And a final example is, quote, pick the target, freeze it, personalize it, and polarize it, end quote. This is what the NEA gave to its teachers to train them to be activists. Push a negative hard. Pick your target, freeze it, personalize it, polarize it. This is what teachers are trained to do by the NEA. Now, this Teach Truth Day of Action is meant to recruit teachers and to recruit activists around the country to organize, gather, march, and protest. This is what the NEA does. The NEA's website provides all kinds of resources for the event, such as an action plan, posters, graphics, messages for signs, messages for social media, and even chants. Some of the event sponsors include Black Lives Matter at School. I've discussed them before. The Gay, Lesbian, Straight Education Network. I've discussed them before, and even in my book. The National Equity Project, and of course the 1619 Project Education Network. The major sponsor, however, is the Zinn Education Foundation, as in Howard Zinn, who is the author of the radical book, People's History of the United States. Zinn even described himself as an anarchist and a socialist. The NEA website directs you to the Zinn Education Foundation website to learn more about their special event. The Zinn Education Foundation teaches that America is oppressive and racist, and they promote teaching things like climate justice. So, teachers and parents, here is another example of one of those quote-unquote special events that everyone gets excited about in schools. There will be flyers, emails, social media posts, get-togethers, demonstrations in front of historic sites, and if you're lucky, you might even make it on the evening news. People get excited about this stuff. But as always, if you look just a little deeper at the ideologies behind these special events, we have political activism based on the teachings of a self-described anarchist and socialist. That's the state of state schools, unfortunately. All right, you guys, thanks and take care.